and these are part of things that we are discussing in this class, is that one other thing that the Iranian state didn't have, that Iraqis did, Libyans did, was state ideology, populist ideology. The Shah wasn't a populist ideologue, and therefore in this contestation he lost. And others came to represent the nation, represent the people, whereas in the case of even Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq particularly, they had a populist state. The policies may not have diverged radically from what the Iranian state did, but they had a populist state, ideology, and that populist ideology could absorb a lot of the sort of dissent. Yep. The Shah had the revolution, the white revolution, but the revolution without an ideology, whereas other places had the ideology but not the revolution.
And Turkey as well, with Ataturk, definitely you have a populist ideology. And I mean, I think it's interesting in the case of Turkey, you've talked about the economic development in Turkey, but it has been much more gradual, and many Turks have lamented the fact that they lost the oil when the Ottoman Empire collapsed. They lost Mosul, but so they had to fall back on their agriculture and tourism and shipping and so forth. Whereas in Iran, I mean, I think it is also that's an interesting part of the equation is the rural areas of Iran and the agriculture in Iran. Where does it fit in economically and politically into this?
Because my knowledge of history, I exhaust myself too quickly. To make up for it, when I can't find an answer, I look at the map. I try to improve my geography. If I can't explain something about Turkey, historically, look at the map. When you're that close to Europe, you have a different destiny ahead of you. When you have been part of, if you might have been an empire, but if most of your empire has been in the European end of things, the Ottoman Empire becomes the different empire than the Persian Empire. And if you're in the Middle East, look around you, and that's a different map. If you're in Afghanistan, with all our theories put together, how much chance would Afghanistan have to become Korea? Look at, as a good student of history, you should become a good student of geography.
No, absolutely. Well, I wanted to make that point about Korea as well, because I think it's very difficult to compare South Korea and Iran from a geopolitical standpoint, because as we have discussed, as the issue has been raised in some of these articles, the Shah was very ambitious. He was economically and geopolitically and militarily ambitious in a way that I don't think the leaders of South Korea and Japan were. For sure.
You know what the king of Morocco once said to the Shah? I hear that he said, "Your Majesty, you loved Iran, but I wish you had loved Iranians a bit more."
Just a short question about the Shah. In your opinion, how much did he know about economy? Because he made all the decisions about the economy.
Well, as a layman answer, I would say I know very little about music, but I can tell a good concert when I listen. You don't have to know. You don't have to be an economist to know, to be able to make decisions in economic terms. But don't forget, he had been dealing with these issues over a long period of time. And he had this continuity that almost no minister could match him. Mm-hmm. I've often seen him correcting his Minister of Agriculture on minute points about the waterfall in Iran and how much of it and how much he cared for it. It's amazing. And he had a very good memory, incidentally. Personal memory is just impeccable. And he remembered things that no other minister around the table knew. They had to have a briefing paper or something to find out what happened before them, but he knew. So you can still make good decisions, you can make bad decisions, but you don't have to be an economist to make good economic decisions.
Milad.
I have a friend, he's a novelist, his name is Reza Amirkhani, very close to the sort of power apparatus in Iran, and he wrote a book, somewhat polemical. The book is called Nafahat Naft. I don't know how to translate that, Professor.
Sense of oil.
Sense of
Sense.
Yeah. And basically, he talks about this dichotomy, whether it's mercy or
Blessing or curse.
curse, exactly. And in a very strange way, given his context, he infers that until we have our hands on oil, this despotic regime would continue. And it's very courageous of him to kind of make that argument, or at least infer it in his book. Would you agree with that?
I think it's a fair statement based on whatever we've discussed, namely that taxation without representation. People have to have a stake in the country by paying taxes, and therefore they say, how are you going to spend my tax money? As soon as it comes to the state, it says that I'm going to spend my money. Because the entire, as you know, even the entire distribution of oil in Iran is in the state hands. And when it's the state, it becomes the person who controls the state without any intermediary through participation. And from that perspective, I think, sure.
But I want to play the devil's advocate. And I said, despite the oil and its fundamental role, Iranian state was much more representative than states in the region. And it had a kind of political culture and political institutions that, for example, think of the parliament. The Iranian parliament from the time of the Constitutional Revolution, with a few exceptions, has continued to operate. A lot of the decision-making went through it. Iran survived World War II because actually it had a very strong parliament. And when one goes, in 1960s, 70s, there are really heated debates that are taking place over various policy making. So in a sense, having oil doesn't mean that you become necessarily despotic or you become democratic. In the case of Iran, you can have the oil and you can have democratic political institutions.
But why
emerging.
would you?
Huh?
Why would you?
Why not? Because there are all the elements that pushes the state to be much more accountable to its population, not because they pay taxes, but because they have claim over the money that you are bringing in.
Well,
Reverses.
I mean,
But that's not democracy.
in theory, you're right. But as we discussed around the table, if we are right in what we've been saying, is that the state precedes the political process because it keeps on delivering all the time.
That's true.
And by delivering either cash basis or on the table or whatever it is, it continues to control the process.
Shapes things.
Shapes things.
Yeah.
It shapes things. I think that's the point probably Amirkhani is making.
Can I ask a follow-up question? Now, this is my leftist side speaking. I'm sure you've been exposed to all kinds of radical critique of liberalism, capitalism, liberalism of sort of systems, economic systems with political implications that lead to this global dominations, and people in the periphery are suppressed, and the wars are basically produced out of these rationalities, secular rationalities of governance, and so on and so forth. And rhetoric like this actually has a lot of support, resonances of it has a lot of support among Iranian, what I guess is called conservative Iranians or religious crowd or whatever they're called. As an economist, being in charge of one of the main countries in the Middle East, how do you feel, how do you respond to criticisms of this sort? Do you read them as a bunch of idiot talking crap or a bunch of idealists who are just like, yeah, whatever? Or are you actually taking into account the fact that they're actually making sense and we're just pushing on a dead power in the wrong bucket of a sort?
Well, every system that I'm familiar with has its excesses. You can have a capitalist economy like the United States, and yet your social network or your social safety net is not adequate because the rich will not or are in a position not to pay enough taxes for you to provide. You can have a Canadian system elsewhere. What I've seen elsewhere, or at least what all of us have witnessed, is that the centrally planned economies, taken to their extremes, have not delivered either. So the communism failed us. They still continue in Cuba, maybe North Korea or elsewhere in a highly centralized system. But even in China, as you know, as you well know, that the political system allowed the economy to grow in a different fashion, at least for a while, until such time as it will take its course. Now, there must be surely a happy medium here. Clearly, there is especially in an oil-producing country, there is a role. I agree with Dr. Tavakkoli. There is a role for the government to play. You can't just skip it. The fact is you have it. So there has to be a way of spending it and a way to be accountable for it. You can't just not to spend it because we want to tax people more. I came to Toronto, and one of the comments I received about the new mayor or the old mayor who wants to run again, and it's very famous in our part down the south too, is that he has reduced taxes, or in certain parts of it. Therefore, it's not just that people would love to participate in the democratic process and therefore pay a higher price for it. All of us are trying to reduce, under the law, our tax obligations. So where is the happy medium? Where is the happy balance where the role of the state is well defined and then the individuals and corporations also carry their weight? I can only describe the system to you without answering you. This is like getting the plan organizations coordinated policies. We're bound to have shortages in one form or the other. Ali?
Okay, I was trying to say that considering the IMF and the Euro and your involvement in IMF, I had a question regarding this question. Until now, we're asked you on the position of Iran's central bank, but increasingly, and I read articles, especially anthropology and sociology, they talk in neo-colonialism. They talk about IMF, especially the economic stabilization program, actually making the situation worse in the countries that they implemented. First, they give them loans, and the argument goes, and then they can't pay because the loan is a substantial loan. They can't pay it out because they don't have any production, they don't have an economic situation that can support it. Then they fall, the balance of payment situation happens, and they can't pay it off. And then we have the economic stabilization program coming in and making the situation even worse for the country. Can you comment on that, and whether that or even the idea of development, that some people have criticized it, what we consider development, and the formula that they try to implement in third world countries is not actually, will not lead to development, really, in reality. It will actually make the situation worse in those countries.
If you look at the emerging markets today, you might have read that we've had currency crisis in Turkey, Argentina, and many other parts of the world. We've had currency crisis of various magnitudes. Going back to my time when I was active in the IMF in Southeast Asia, you might remember collapse of the Indonesian economy, Malaysian economy. And basically what happens in these countries, or often happens, is that they borrow as a result of the globalization of the marketplace. They borrow money, and that borrowing can take different forms. I give you one obvious example. there are major American corporations who have huge balances in local currencies outside the United States. And they are very open about it. For tax purposes, Apple is better off keeping its money in Ireland than bringing it here. And it's quite legitimate under the law of the United States. There are many other players as a result of this. The Chinese, as you know, are major surplus. Now, this huge money goes through the banking system. And because of the low interest rate policy of the United States, which has so far has been there, you heard about, that there's going to be a change in that direction, or has been already, and hence the market reaction to the stock market. These countries like Turkey are very tempted to borrow and to spend. It's equivalent, more or less, if you like, in economic terms, of spending the oil money. So they too go beyond their means until the interest rates begin to move, and suddenly you have a Turkish crisis. I don't want to defend my every policy or every stabilization policy of the IMF, but that is normally when the IMF comes in, not before.